Special shout out to all my patrons. Oh, we got a call in. We got a Skype call. Remember, if you want to hear the Skype calls, you got to come to Twitch. Yellow. Ooh.
Hello. Can you hear me?
Yeah, what's up?
Hey, yeah. So obviously, I saw your TikTok there, right?
Uh-huh.
So some things on there I honestly mostly agree with.
Okay.
The things that I actually don't are number 7, your systemic racism. I do not believe that to be real. Trans men and women are not men and women, and there is, in fact, I believe, number 4 is true.
Okay, so where do you want to start?
One second.
Okay.
Sorry about that. Yeah, let's start with the systemic racism.
Sure, systemic racism, 100%. I can prove it pretty quickly.
Go ahead.
So, have you heard of the Veil of Darkness study?
I don't suppose I have.
Okay. So, what we did is we studied 90 million traffic stops.
Hold on. Who's we first?
We would be Stanford, the College of Stanford. I just use the we as in like the metaphorical we as a society, people.
Okay, got it.
So they studied 95 million traffic stops between 2011 to 2018. And what they found was in that period, they obviously, guys, I know you can't hear. If you want to hear the Skype call debate, you got to come to Twitch. What they did is they analyzed all the variables of those stops and found that cops disproportionately pull over black drivers to white drivers. And they found that those numbers only even out at nighttime when the cops can no longer see the driver of the car. But if it's daytime, black drivers are significantly pulled over more, in some cases with a disparity of 33-1.
Okay. So, I think it's kind of moot arguing, the reason for the pullover. But it might be something to look into as to why, in fact, they were pulled over. Did they cover that in that study?
Yes, they equated for all of those variables. So they looked at people who were pulled over for the same thing, people who had priors or didn't have priors, type of car, they accounted for all of that. And again, black people are pulled over at a much higher disparity than white people during the day. And at night, when cops can no longer see the color of the person driving the car, that's when those numbers tend to even out.
All right, and that's obviously pretty black and white there. Not to, obviously, no pun intended, but that to me still does not speak systemic racism. That says, and no doubt there is racism in our judicial system, but to say it's systemic, I don't think it's systemic. I think what it is people are racist, right? Individuals are racist.
Wait, if you say that there is racism in the system, that would be systemic racism.
And the reason I say that it's not systemic is because there are individuals who are a part of the system. You and I are a part of the system, okay? There are people out there who are obviously a part of the system. Now, they are racist, no doubt, but the system itself, I do not believe, or I do not think is, in fact, racist. It's not designed to hold any one individual racist or over another based on their color of their skin.
Okay, I can show you further examples of how it does do that and how it was designed to do that. The first thing I'll bring up, do you know who Lee Atwater is?
If I just go, please enlighten me.
Okay, so Lee Atwater was a Southern campaign strategist. He was like, imperative to getting George Bush Sr., Ronald Reagan, and Richard Nixon elected. Like legitimately, they probably would have not won their elections if not for him. He did an interview in 1981 to talk about the way that specifically Southern Republicans created laws. Now, I'm going to read a quote that he said. I will bleep out where he says the N-word because obviously he's racist. But he said, you start out in 1954 by saying N-word, N-word, N-word. By 1968, you can't say N-word. That hurts you, backfires. So you say stuff like forced busing, states' rights, and all that stuff. And you're getting so abstract. Now you're talking about cutting taxes, and all these things you're talking about are totally economic things. And a byproduct of them is blacks get hurt worse than whites. So they specifically created policies to be abstract. They didn't write them to just outwardly say racism, but they wrote them to be abstract to focus on disparities so that people like yourself would say, well, no, but there's nothing inherently racist about the system because it doesn't say it is. But they knew that. They worked around that. And I can provide you examples of how they worked around it, like specific policies and specific ways that systems run that are systemically racist by nature.
Okay, please.
Yeah, sure. So we can look at education. So do you know how education is funded primarily throughout the United States?
State funded. I mean, is it not? Each individual area is funded by the taxpayers that live in that area through home ownership?
Correct. So it's property rights, right? Your property rights, property tax. So when you pay property tax, your property tax is pooled by your county and that goes towards schools. Now, in areas where property is either much less expensive or you're not owning as much, so you have a bunch of people going to more rental properties, you're going to notice that the disparity of income inequality to property to education is pretty high. So that's why when you go into the more wealthier suburban neighborhoods, they have better funded schools than per child, especially than like inner city schools. Now, Black people used to live predominantly on suburban farmland, but in the 1930s, when redlining became a thing, Black people were shoveled into inner cities where the property tax dropped and the property tax was lower. What we saw is at the same time that Black people were pushed into these inner city areas was around the same time we started funding education through property tax. Like it lines up 1-to-1. Now, the system of education, the system of it being funded through property tax, not a on the books inherently racist thing. However, knowing that it was created during a disparity, knowing that Black people still predominantly live in inner cities, and knowing how large the wealth gap is between Black and white Americans, it goes to show that this is still a systemically racist system, even if it doesn't outwardly say it.
So on that point, you obviously brought up some great points I've never even, looked at or even knew about, to be honest. And that does enlighten me a little bit. However, I will still say that on the whole, there are many opportunities for young Black Americans and even Americans and, Black Americans in general to change their status and position in life. Now, that's not to say that our system is perfect. And was it created during a time of disparity? Yeah, I think at that time, America runs on a lot of archaic systems that definitely need to be changed. But to say that, there's no way out of it, or that,
well, so hold on. That's not what we're saying, right? So when we talk about systemic racism, or at least when I talk about systemic racism, I'm not over here saying that like it's impossible as a Black person to succeed, because obviously there are Black people who do succeed. What we're saying is, imagine America is a Mario Kart race. Now, white people are Mario. The race starts, they go around the track 3 times. Black people, we're Donkey Kong, pun intended. We have only just now started to go around the track as Mario is around the track, gone around the track 3 times. Mario has 3 mushrooms to speed up. We have a banana peel. We're not saying we can't win, but we're at a severe disadvantage, and we started later in life. So right now there's a gross inequity between Black and white Americans. When we look at like the wealth gap, when we look at the education gap, when we look at the criminal justice system, when we look at education, when we look at, I already said education, when we look at all these other things, right? We see a disparity, and that disparity was created due to 400 plus years of systemic oppression.
Okay, so while obviously, I'd be a fool to disagree with the fact that, Black people were not starting off on a less of a foot than whites. I think it's or than white people in past, right? In past, I think it's. I don't think that's true today, right? And I don't think that's been true for at least the last 2 decades. And the reason I say that, I mean, we have plenty of white Americans in similar positions to Black Americans. Now, and I think, they haven't experienced necessarily the same oppression or outright or overt racism that Black Americans have. However, I think that is in fact changing in the last 5 years, at least, with overt and outright racism towards white people. But I think your analogy with the Mario Kart analogy, I don't think that holds ground today. And again, I don't think that holds ground today.
I would disagree. I can provide you evidence why it does. Do you know what currently the median wealth is for white American households? Like what their median wealth is right now?
Where are you pulling that statistic from?
The census.
What, the U.S. Census?
Yes.
Okay, which is what? What did you pull from there?
So the median wealth for white households is $171,000. That's the median.
Okay.
You know what the median wealth is for Black households?
What is it?
Take a guess.
30,000.
Lower.
Okay, 15,000.
Lower.
Really? Okay, 5.
Little higher.
I mean, how?
9.
Okay, what? 10? 9,000? Okay.
So 9,000 is the median wealth in Black households.
Okay, the median wealth of Black households is 9,000, right? And the median wealth of white households is how much did you say?
171,000.
Okay.
So when we talk about the median wealth, hold on, I just want to finish this really quickly. When we talk about the median wealth, we use it to show that our children on average are not starting from the same place, right? So a white child who's born to a household with a predominant amount of wealth is going to get into these higher funded schools. They are going to actually have a little bit more opportunity than their Black counterparts, whereas the Black families who are sending their kids to the lower funded schools, their kids are going to have less economical advantages than their white counterparts. And those economic advantages were designed to exist. Hence why redlining was a thing. There were multiple policies meant to keep Black people in a lower wealth bracket. These were all designed, enforced, and were pretty much a thing up until maybe the 90s, and was when we started seeing most of these go away. Like redlining policies existed up until the 1990s, and none of that is taking into account the fact that like medical racism, Black women still have a higher maternal mortality rate than their white counterparts. It doesn't take into the justice system where Black people are going to receive harsher prison sentences and longer time in jail than their white counterparts, even when we take into socioeconomic differences. Like it does all of these things compound because
what if I may interject here real quickly, right, is you even said that there are the ability for Black Americans to succeed, and I think and to me in the last 20 at least the last 2 decades, Black Americans can since 2010 at a minimum, so maybe not the last 2 decades, but 2010 at a minimum, Black Americans have absolutely had the opportunity to get out of their situation, right? So when we talk about them starting off on a lower foot, right, or behind in the race, as it were, does that take into account individual decision making? Does that take into account, their drive? It doesn't take into account a lot of different things.
So here's the thing. I don't disagree with you that personal decisions play a lot of roles into what we do in life. But you have to also acknowledge that environment can really affect those personal decisions. So for example, where you might have a wealthy white kid who grows up in the suburbs, right? They are not going to have the influence of inner city gang culture like your Black kids who grow up in inner cities. They won't even have that influence. Now, we can sit on the
I mean,
outside.
that's a complex issue, right?
Well, yeah, no, but
We're
that's what I'm
talking,
saying. We can sit on the outside and go, well, it's a personal decision. They shouldn't have gotten into this violence. But you and I both know how complex it is that when you're a 9-year-old kid and your whole family is engaged in this culture and they're bringing you into this culture, it's kind of hard to say no. Right. So we
right.
recognize that just, and I'm not saying that there aren't white people who suffer in sort of ways that their black counterparts do. Right. Economically, of course there are. All I'm saying is that these systems weren't designed to keep them down. They were designed specifically to keep black people down. And that's admitted from the people who designed the system. They've admitted that this is what the system was designed to do. So when we
But
look,
you're talking about the 80s and the 90s. Yes, I acknowledge 100% that those systems back then were absolutely 100% designed to keep whites above blacks, without a doubt. I'm not naive. I'm not ignorant to that fact. But as the new, the 2000s roll around, I don't think that is entirely the case anymore. Right
can you
now,
can you tell me what happened then between the
there
90s
remnants.
and now? What has happened to change that?
I mean, so much has happened, and I think we all are pretty clear on that. I mean, we've gone from, and it's just so many different social issues. We've gone from gays being this underground thing. We've gone from trans being this type of fetish type thing. Drag. We've gone from so much to where we were before, and that just happened in the last 15 years, right? And in the last 5 years, it's even picked up more steam. So to say that that stuff can't happen within a decade, I don't think that's necessarily. I mean, it's not true. Like,
wait, but
in the last
I
10 years,
recognize what you're saying, right? But you said that since the 90s into the 2000s, there has been a shift.
Mm-hmm.
And you're saying something has changed, and now black people are not facing the same issues they were facing in the 90s. What was that thing?
Okay.
What happened to change that?
So from again, right, I can only speak from my perspective. And so from my perspective on this situation is that people there's obviously, and again, I can agree with this, that there's not enough being done, but things are being done, right? When we look at police, judicial system issues, right? No longer are people just sitting idly by saying, "Hey, this is just the way it is." That's not happening, and there are a lot of people, both black and white, whatever race, backing that up. Like the police system, right? The police, the way that they do things is obviously wrong, right? It is obviously wrong. There are people out there that look at skin color, and that needs to be corrected. And back then, people just didn't bat an eye. The good old boy system was a thing. And there are still remnants of that today. Absolutely. But it's being called out more and more. And I know personally in my job, when it comes to what we call equal opportunity or whatever it is, whatever job you're in, is that they don't tolerate that type of stuff. And it's handled with a swiftness. It's handled not just with the swiftness, but a very hard hammer that crashes down. It's like you cannot act that way towards another human being, regardless of their skin color. You just can't do it.
Wait, we're not talking about interpersonal racism, right? We're not talking about the way one person can react to another. We're talking about systemic. So systemic has nothing to do. Systemic specifically is designed so that it can work without the input of one specific person. So systemic has nothing to do with that. So what changed you admit that systemic racism existed in the 90s, and then you're saying that it doesn't exist now. So what changed between the 90s and now? What policies were passed? What societal change? What changed to remove that systemic racism from the system?
So obviously their policies were not really passed, right? It wasn't necessarily policies that were passed. And that therein lies part of the problem. But people, on the whole, are waking up to the fact that racism is, systemic racism did in fact exist to a very, very bad degree. And they are not only waking up to the fact, but they're very, coherent to that fact and diving in on that fact that it did take place. So there are, again, and I'm talking within my job, which is part of the system. It's a government job. Okay, so it's part of the government. It's a government job. And these policies being passed in my job specifically, which is still part of the system at large, is that there are, people are expected to be treated the same regardless of their skin color, and that's a government job. So that's, people at the government level are looking at this, and they're identifying it's a problem. It has been a problem. They are making these changes. The difficulty is the states, right? The states are the federal is not the issue. It's the states that are the issue, because the federal only has so much control over the states. Agreed? Right? So when it comes to state policing or state judicial issues, like we can't, and especially in the South, right? Obviously the Southeast is a big issue that we're still trying to overcome. But I think on the whole, people are waking up to the fact since 2000, 2005, 2010, and especially in the last decade, we're waking up to the fact that Black people are being mistreated, and we need to move away from that. Are there still remnants of it? Yes, there are.
So wait, really quickly, I'm not going to deny that systemic racism hasn't gotten better, right? Like if I have a plate full of shit and I take 25% of the shit off the plate, yeah, I have less shit on my plate, but there is still shit on the plate, right? Like I'm not going to deny that the plate doesn't still have shit on it. So I think I think what's very clear that obviously there hasn't been any major shift because we haven't changed the way these systems have worked. And when I look at the disparities in the system, I look at it federally. I look at it, or I won't say federally, I look at it nationally. So I'm looking across the board what the averages are in the whole country. And I look at where the country is and what the country, is evening up as. And every single stat, every single study, all of it points to the same thing, that there are inherent disparities that exist in the system that make it harder for Black Americans. Doesn't take into account what?
That just doesn't take into account a lot of the stuff that goes on a day-to-day basis. You're talking about inner city gang violence, right? That's a huge issue. Okay. And that really is, right? And did that get created by white people back in the day? Probably, right? That was
specifically the CIA.
Right. I'm tracking that whole story, but the point here is that, how then do we move away from that? Because I'm telling you, I'm at the federal level, right? And the federal policies that I see in place are a far cry from what everybody else sees. But
you haven't been able to name me any federal policies. I've asked you for policies specifically that have gone through to eliminate
So what I'm saying is, when I say federal policy, you're right. What I mean by federal policies, I don't mean national policies, right? I work in federal government, okay? But I'm not. The policies that I see are within our system, our closed system. It's not a national policy. And I agree with you, man. I really do agree with you. There's not a national policy that has been set forth that says X, Y, and Z for Black people. There hasn't been, and I agree with you. But I also don't see that there's the same situation, because you talked about redlining, right? Redlining affects all people, poor, white or Black. Okay, it affects everybody that doesn't have the ability to provide any sort of value to whatever they see as value, right?
Sure, but when we talk about redlining, we talk about how it disproportionately affected Black Americans, like disproportionately.
Back in the day.
Well, no, between 1930 and 1990.
Yes.
1990 is not back in the day, dude. I was born in the 90s. It's not back in the day. It's 30 years ago. That's not back in the day.
But what I'm saying is, so much progress has taken place in the last 23 years that 1990 feels back in the day. Okay, that's how it feels to me. And for all the progress we've made, we've also obviously, I think we've brought to light a lot of people that are still stuck in the freaking 40s, that are still stuck in the 30s and the 20s and the 1800s. We are making progress, but there are still people who wish us to be in an era where they have control and power.
Yeah, I've never denied that we weren't making progress, right? I've never denied that.
What I'm saying is exponential progress.
No, I wouldn't call it exponential. I think that we had two major exponential periods, But other than that, it's
Okay.
remained pretty consistent since the removal of since the passing of the Civil Rights Act and like the removal of segregation and Jim Crow. It's remained fairly consistent. It hasn't really had a major shift since then. We haven't had I thought that major cultural shift was going to come in the wake of George Floyd, but it didn't. Right? We still have these major cultural issues. We still have these issues at a systemic level.
There's an issue right there, right? We're looking at George Floyd, okay? So, was the George Floyd, look, listen, the police officers that conducted the George Floyd stop and all the murder that took place there, those police officers were absolute shit, okay? They were shit, 100%. They didn't know their fucking job. Some of them probably, if not most of them, were racist as fuck. And that situation was a clusterfuck. Okay, was a clusterfuck. But that situation itself should not have brought on a major cultural change, right? The major cultural change that should come from that for Black people should come from the fact that what you were talking about earlier, it's not the police, destroying, and it's not even that. Like if we look at, sure, you were talking about earlier again, you were talking about being Black people being disproportionately pulled over. Get that, okay? But a lot of people grasp onto the news and the media, right, which is police officers shooting or doing something crazy to Black people, right? And to be quite honest with you, I don't know that percentage, so I'm just gonna just speculate and kind of not really speculate, but just kind of speculate, which is I can't imagine that's an everyday, it might be an everyday occurrence, but the percentage of police interactions to people killed, I really cannot imagine it's that high. Okay?
Wait. So it's not about the percentage between how many people the police react with, or the police interact with, and how many people they kill. It's if any unarmed killing happens on police watch, if any unintentional, avoidable death happens at the hand of state violence, that's one of those is too many.
Hold on. But the problem there, that lies, I don't, and I've argued this multiple times with plenty of different people, is that I don't personally think, yes, the unarmed deaths or the miscalculated death, whatever the case may be on that point, right, is that there are still Black people having that happen to them. There are still white people having that happen to them. That comes down to the, no training or incorrect training or poor training to police officers.
But wait, hold on, because that's not true. We've severely increased police training since the 80s, and this is still happening since the 90s, since the Rodney King
but
assault.
I also said incorrect or poor training, because when we look at places like Europe and the United Kingdom, right, their force is not guns drawn, right, and
it's
just
guns.
not, right.
But hold on, even when we look at police brutality as a whole, it disproportionately affects Black Americans. They suffer the most at the hands of police brutality, not just killing, but all brutality from cops. Black Americans suffer the most per capita when it comes to police brutality.
Okay, but again, you've also said there's a bunch of inner city gang violence, right? And when we look at that,
created by the system.
Say again?
Created by the system,
no doubt.
So now we're getting brutalized we're getting brutalized by the system for something the system created.
But what I'm saying is, right, what I'm trying to get to here is the culture change that we were talking about. My original point here was that when it comes to cultural change, it should not have been the George Floyd incident. Okay, it should be the fact that
the George Floyd incident wasn't the change; it was the last nail in the coffin.
Okay, right. I get what you're trying to say on that point, and I understand that. But what I'm trying to get at here is that should not have been, the last nail in the coffin. What should be, in my mind, is, hey, how do we escape this gang violence that we obviously is a remnant, right? It's remnants of what was passed before or done before. It's clearly there, okay? Now, my question is, do we need white people to clean up that situation? right? Do you want federal governments to come in and handle that situation? Do you want the state government to come in and handle? We've already seen with the fucking drug and the DEA and all this other shit that happens. It's just a stupid war on drugs. It's not going to solve anything. So do we really want the federal government more and more involved, or is there some way for us as individuals in a community to come together and handle that situation with support from the state, if not driven by the state, right? So when we have this inner city gang violence, how do we escape it? Are we gonna continue to blame and always blame? Was it created by whites? Yes, it was. But for how long are we gonna accept that as an answer? For how long are we gonna sit there and accept that we can't do anything unless something else takes place?
Wait, so I don't think anyone's claiming that. I think what we're saying is there are these very clear disparities that the system is engaging in, and these systems need to be changed from the inside out. These systems need to be completely reworked, because as these systems stand right now, right, they are disproportionately affecting Black Americans over white Americans, and the only way to change it is from the inside. We can't change it from the outside. We can't wish and want and pray for education to stop being funded through property tax, right? The system has to be changed, but they aren't going to change the system because white supremacy is the leader of, leads the country.
It doesn't, though. That's the thing. It doesn't. When we look at the leader of the country, is Joe Biden a white supremacist? And I think even 100%. You said in one of your things,
100%.
I think even one of your things, you said Biden is greater than Trump.
Yeah, I think he's a better president than Trump. I would never claim Biden has not engaged in white supremacy and favored a white supremacy mindset. He absolutely has.
No, I agree with you. However, he is no longer of his own autonomy. The dude is a puppet.
I would disagree with
that.
Biden is the most centrist president we have ever had. He has no left-leaning tendencies whatsoever. He is full center, my guy. Name me one policy he's passed that's a leftist policy.
Okay, listen, I will agree with you on the whole that Joe Biden, look, just because I agree with you, just because you said Joe Biden is not better than or is better than Trump does not make him, anything to write home about. I got you. I feel that point. Okay. But I will say he, we've got Joe Biden in there. He's definitely not. He's not the flag. He's not the rallying cry of the white supremacists that Trump was. Okay, he's not. And that much is for sure. He's not out there doing what Trump did and calling forth his fucking bronies. I can't remember what those guys are. What are those guys called again? The Proud
Boys.
You know who I'm talking. The Proud Boys, right? He's not out there doing that. He's got Kamala Harris as his vice president. You've got AOC in there speaking her mind. She's only one person in a vast, ocean of people. But with all that said, it is a relief to see Trump out of office. But the system itself, again, we're going back to this because I still have, while I see your point and I understand, I still believe that the system favors, not favors. I lied. That's not a good word. The system does not inhibit Black Americans from succeeding and bringing whomever else with them to their level. Okay, the Black Americans that are succeeding should be a shining beacon for the Black Americans, the young Black Americans that are struggling. And do we need to see a federal policy that? Actually, I have a question for you. What explicitly, very explicitly, do you think a federal policy should say to empower Black Americans?
I don't think it's about empowering. I think there's multiple policies that need to be changed. I think we need to generate a policy that reworks the way the education system is funded. I think we need to generate a policy that reworks the way our economic system is set up in the mean place. I think we need to work on the abolishment of police and prisons. I think there's a large litany of things we need to do.
So okay, there's a lot of things. Some things I agree with you. Some things I don't. You said abolishment of police and prisons.
Correct.
That's an interesting take. I've heard before. Haven't engaged in conversation with. If you'd indulge me on that one, please.
Police abolition is pretty essential. Police and prisons are tools of violence used by the state to generate a profit off of slave labor, specifically of poor people and people of color.
But when you say abolishment, you're obviously talking about completely getting rid of. So
yes,
what in their stead?
When it comes to police, we can have other agencies that handle the bulk of police work. Police only spend about 4% of their yearly duties dealing with any sort of violent crime. So we can have other agencies deal with the bulk of police work. And then prisons should be replaced with long-term rehabilitation centers or long-term care centers. But they should not be prisons, because prisons are just plantations. They're just slave farms.
Okay. So yeah. Okay, so you're talking. Okay, we're looking at the police. Let's start with the police, right? The abolishment of police. So you're looking at the abolishment of police. 1 second, if you please.
Okay.
When we're talking about the abolishment of police, I mean, all this comes from the idea that. So you said it's slave labor, right? And
correct.
you know, okay.
It's written into our Constitution that it's slave labor.
Okay, yeah, no, I mean, yeah, I got you. The prison systems are obviously profiting, and I'm not naive to that fact. So I completely agree with you. The prison systems definitely profit and off of people working for free, no doubt. But the police, you see no use for the police. You said 4% of the police. Or 4% of police work is responding to violent crimes, yes?
Yeah, we did a study of 3 major municipalities and found that they only spent 4% of their yearly time on violent crime. The rest was nonviolent interactions.
You said 96% of it was nonviolent?
Correct.
And what is your what other agencies do you believe to go into that?
So, I mean, like, all mental health calls should be done by social workers. I think they should handle probably most neighborly disputes should be handled by like just a third party mediator. Like, we don't need cops for these things. I also think that people oftentimes misuse the police system and will call police for things police don't need to be dealing with. Like,
no, I agree with that. I do agree with that. Oftentimes people do call the police out of or misuse the police. I'll agree with you 100% on that. I agree. So for the most part, I agree on the police officer and the abolishment of that kind of stuff. But you have this data that, quite frankly, I have not looked at. But you have this data, and the only thing that comes to my mind here is that I live in what you would consider a white suburban neighborhood or a suburban neighborhood, right? Nice houses and all this stuff, decent size, all this kind of stuff. But I'm surrounded by Black individuals. And that's what's, and again, it's, I'm not trying to be this naive idiot that says, oh, just because I'm surrounded by 4 or 5 Black individuals in a very nice, expensive neighborhood, that somehow racism doesn't exist, right? That's stupid. But I also think that, there are opportunities for many Black people out there to get to the dreams that that they have and they want to achieve, just as much as white individuals. Is the system fucked? The system fucked? Yes, the system's fucked in a lot of different areas. And I've said this earlier, is that the archaic, we're working on archaic systems that need to be updated and a lot of different things. Absolutely. Are there still people in this country that have this mindset that are whites are somehow better than Black people? And yeah, absolutely. Do they need to be stomped out at every opportunity? Yes, 100%. They need to be put in their place. But there are just too many people out there, Black people, that are succeeding in a lot of different ways. And I'm not saying despite, because I don't think it's despite. It's not despite. The look at Seattle. If I may ask you, so I'm originally from Seattle. I no longer live there, but I'm originally from the Seattle area. Do you know it?
Like not off the top of my head, no.
Seattle, Washington. So Pacific Northwest, Seattle, Washington, is expensive for everybody, anybody, right? Most people, unless you're extremely rich, obviously don't own places inside the city, white or Black. And so, I mean, when we look at inner city stuff, hold on, excuse me one sec. Sorry, I had to burp there. So, when we look at inner city stuff, which is what we're talking about, just the cities in general, look at California, man, right? California is expensive as shit. My brother currently lives in California, San Jose. Expensive. He doesn't own any of his property. And right, he was a car salesman making almost $15,000 a month, and he didn't own a single plot of land. He didn't buy a house there. Right? So my point is that with that is that systemic racism, I think the system doesn't target Black individuals. The system targets people who don't have money. The system targets people who don't know how to rise or do what they need to do to make their. I work with, and I know this sounds stupid as shit, and I'm not trying to sound stupid because I don't like sounding stupid, but I work with plenty of Black wealthy people, and I know plenty of Black wealthy people, and I'm living next to plenty of Black wealthy people. It's not impossible. The system's not out there, right? They don't look at me as some white guy, some racist white guy, and I don't look at them as some Black guy, and I don't. I just had this interaction yesterday. The dude just gave me a trampoline yesterday. So again, I'm not trying to be naive about the situation, but systemically, to me, it does not exist, right? There are racist individuals in the system that need to be plucked out. And if I could think of one thing that the federal government could do to weed that out, is somehow pass a law that says, if you are in a federal position or any position of government, or I don't know how to do it, right? But it says something along the lines that you are identified of being, something, blah, 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 where you are looking at people in their skin color, or you're going off this, or you're saying this, that they're immediately just gone. They're just gone. And obviously that can't take place in America. But that's something that I would absolutely love to do, right? See past. Because there are white people, or excuse me, there are racist people, majority of the white people, there are racist people out there in the system that are racist. That's just a fact, and I get that. But to me, the system in and of itself is not racist. It's just not. But I understand your point. And I honestly, if I'm going to be honest with you, man, you have enlightened me in a lot of different areas in this regard. So I do appreciate that. And I'll probably take that away and do some devil's advocate with people that I talk to. But that's where I stand on that topic and subject.
All right. Well, I do want to give other people a chance to talk, because we've been talking for about 45 minutes. Last thing I would just say is that I do disagree with you. I think I've provided a lot of evidence where the system is still doing this based on current disparities. So I'll leave it at that. Yeah. But it's been a good conversation. So thank you for stopping by.
Hey, real quick, can I call back?
Yeah. I mean, you can call back the next time you see me live or whatever.
I mean, I'm just going to hang up and kind of call back. Is that cool?
I want to give other people a chance to talk. I didn't want to there have been Skype calls coming in while me and you have been talking, so I didn't want to give other people a chance.
All right, my bad. Talk. Hey, what is your Twitch real quick? I shut down TikTok. What's your Twitch?
It's the same thing, Jovan Bradley, my same name.
Joe Bond Bradley. All right, man. Well, I appreciate your time, man. You have a great day.
You too.